strong evidence for, if not proof, of the delusion of religion and belief in gods.
Hello, I'm Randy. This was me when I was an adolescent. This is me relatively recently.
Because so many people have expressed shock and even horror of what they consider as my flushing faith down the toilet, I have prepared this explanation to clarify what happens. First of all, I was brainwashed from infancy into the indoctrination and delusion of God and religion. My parents chose the LDS or Mormon Church, and I emphasize they chose it, even though they too were indoctrinated by their parents and a long line of ancestors before them. This indoctrination began as a neonate of a few weeks old. The first step was the so-called priesthood blessing. A group of men would hold the baby in their arms and then practically throw the baby up and down. Usually, the father would say a prayer that was supposed to be inspired. If the bouncy did not scare the baby into crying, then all the strange people around sure would. Then I was required to attend church all Sunday long. Meetings in the morning for children, and then go to lunch. Then back to church for the afternoon meeting, Sunday school. Then back home for a short break, till back to church in the evening, so-called, quote, sacrament meeting, unquote. Sunday was a traumatic, hectic ordeal with yelling, threats, and coercion. Of course, we had to wear uncomfortable clothing deemed appropriate for the Sabbath, the kooky religious name that he and many of the Mormon faith called Sunday. Uncomfortable, scratchy suit, vest, and tourniquets. We could not even change our clothes into something more comfortable while at home.
The most we were permitted to do
was to remove the suit and tie. This because my father claimed clothing influenced one's, quote, behavior. The next phase was preparation for baptism. All the indoctrination was oriented to this end, to convince me to be baptized. Although I was not considered a, quote, sinner, unquote, before, but as soon as I turned the magical age of 8, I could now sin, and baptism was the imperative. Then preparation to receive the, quote, Aaronic priesthood in its various degrees and offices, and of course tithing was required as soon as I was baptized. More priesthoods, this time the Melchizedek. Next step, the secret temple endowments. Magic underwear that could only be purchased from the church,
that you were supposed to wear 24 hours a day for the rest of your life.
And then off to an LDS mission. I was required to save money during my adolescence, and where I wasn't able, my family was required to pay for my stay for 2 years in another location. Most other churches pay for their missionaries, but the degree of indoctrination and brainwashing was so great that we were convinced to pay for it. I was sent to Sao Paulo, Brazil. So after the mission temple marriage, more secret rites where only specific, quote, worthy, unquote, members sworn to secrecy could watch the temple ceremony, meaning anyone else who was not a member of the church and in good standing, unquote, could not participate. And then doing all the super secret rites for millions of deceased people, baptisms for the dead, washing, anointed, being naked, with the exception of a sheet hanging over you, and ordaining the priesthood and temple marriages, because the, quote, earthly marriage ceremony was not sufficient to be married in the supposed next life. So the degree of brainwashing was extreme. So now, after over half a century of intense social inculcation, when I woke up and realized I am free,
I shook off the oppressive mental and social shackles that I had permitted that they place on me.
So these are the results of my empirical investigation and exploration. A god or gods did not create mankind. It was the opposite. Some parts of mankind created the delusion of imaginary God for a multitude of reasons. Financial remuneration of lazy people who found it easier than real beneficial work. There is no religious organization nor association that does not involve money. Many religions started with the desire to control the local population. Notice how obsessed they are with what goes on in the privacy of the bedroom where they have no involvement.
Moreover, consider what happens to anyone who questions authority or points out the inconsistencies of and incongruity of the religious doctrines, not to mention the audacity of debating the validity of such claims. They are vilified, reviled, mistreated, and denigrated by being called apostate, heretic, immoral, diabolically possessed, a defector or renegade, and shunned, rejected, and despised by the other deluded members. When I asked my father to clarify his belief about his God belief, he stated emphatically that I've heard that garbage before, and declared that Satan has been working on you, and changed the subject twice before I gave up.
And finally, recognize that who or what you worship is totally influenced by your family and community where you were born, and has nothing to do with being true, evidential, or based on empirical and scientific principles and fundamentals. Who would you worship, or which religious sect would you cling to if you were born in the Middle East, or in India, or in China, or in Japan? When I was a child growing up in the United States in Utah, in a small rural LDS community, my father beat us with a wooden paddle with holes drilled in it on our bare buttocks if we ever lied about anything to him. But then he told the lie so many parents tell their children, that of pagan Claus, aka Santa Claus. But there is nothing in the Santa Claus lie that is holy.
It is just an unholy, nefarious, and wicked scheme to manipulate children by extortion, intimidation, and threatening. Concurrently with the lie of pagan Claus, my father forced and indoctrinated me into this thing society calls religion, more specifically the so-called Christian cult, and worse still the LDS or Mormon sect, and told me that I had to act in strange and unnatural ways and perform creepy, peculiar, and weird rituals and things, and that I was prohibited of doing a multitude of other things. Let's begin by enumerating many of these weird rituals and practices that are inconsistent paradoxes. You were supposed to believe in an invisible cosmic being that saw and knew everything, was all-powerful and all-loving. However, could he really be all-powerful if he could not create a rock so large that he could not lift it? And being all-knowing, he knew what he would do next Thursday. However, knowing this, could he change it? So he could never be all-powerful. The creators of the God concept were too ambitious and overstepped the definition. I first considered this when I heard Stefan Molyneux of Free Domain Radio talk about a square circle. Omnipotence is mutually exclusive of omniscience. And after studying the Bible, if you started to count the millions, if not billions, who supposedly were murdered by Yahweh's decree, how could you call him all-loving? That was a contradiction of terms. In the so-called Bible myth collection, in the books of Matthew 18 verse 6, Luke 17 verse 2, and Mark 9 verse 42, that Jesus' character allegedly stated,
But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea.
However, today and every single day, over 20 to 25,000 little children will die of starvation, hunger, wars, disease, and other causes. Where is this man Jesus and his love for those little children? Accordingly, could this God, Yahweh, ever be considered all-loving? Furthermore, according to the Bible legend, all of humanity was supposedly slaughtered in a huge worldwide flood because...
And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart.
The very creature that Yahweh, the, quote, perfect God, who could only create perfection, was not perfect. Therefore, how could he the all-knowing, and then say,
And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air. For it repenteth me that I have made them.
the same persons that was supposedly all-loving.
And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh wherein is the breath of life from under heaven. And everything that is in the earth shall die.
So, omnipotence is an impossibility. So the fundamental attributes of the more popular description of the God of the Jews, Christians, and the Muslims is also impossible. They claim that this person is omniscient, but all-knowing is mutually exclusive to all-powerful. Just like the definition of square is mutually exclusive to the definition of circle. As you peruse and analyze the Bible legends, Yahweh is supposed to be all-loving. Notwithstanding, millions, if not billions of people were massacred in the name of this being with specific instruction to include babies, infants, little children, and pregnant women, with specific instruction to kill these mentioned countless.
And Moses said unto them, Have ye saved all the women alive? Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves.
By the facts, the more legitimate definition from the empiricism and empirical data is a genocidal maniac. Kill the Mennonites, kill the Syrians, kill the Amalekites, kill, kill, kill. Another concept my father tried to convince me of was that I was somehow involved with the bad conduct of two naked people in a garden he claimed were extremely distant relatives who lived and died thousands of years ago, who had listened to the urging of a talking snake to eat some fruit off of a tree that the invisible cosmic being had prohibited that they eat, but had planted there right in the middle of the garden. Just at that time, the cosmic being didn't seem to be so invisible. Therefore, he stated that I was somehow punishable for this bad conduct, tried to incriminate me, and alleged that I now needed the intercession of a guy that lived 2,000 years ago, who was born under the auspicious relationship to the cloaked floating space ghost in a peculiar implausible circumstances. That his mother was still a virgin when he was conceived. But even though one of the largest religious sects was based on his life, he apparently lived and died without a trace. No historical artifacts, no recorded writings written by himself, nothing to show proof that he had even ever lived. Not even mention of historians of the time. The only support for his existence were conflicting and contradicting hearsay accounts for, quote, books written by anonymous authors decades after this Jesus was supposed to have lived. But each of the four books could not give a collaborative account that did not contradict the other three. So the supernatural assertions of the life and the unbelievable circumstances surrounding the death of this Jesus could never be corroborated or authenticated. As a result of his claim that I had a spiritual disease, one part of the indoctrination required I needed to be forcibly submerged into a tank of water publicly when I turned 8. That I had to discuss probing personal questions such as about sexual practices and divulge these answers to a perfect stranger, usually an older man, totally unrelated, who was stated had the right to know. Masturbation was prohibited, as was any form of sexual contact before marriage was strictly banned on threat of excommunication of and from the religious sect. But as if this were not enough, I was required to believe in the Book of Mormon, an unsubstantiated work purportedly by Joseph Smith, a semi-illiterate frontiers boy who stated that he had been visited by the invisible cosmic being and the zombie Jesus at the same time, and subsequent angels of dead zombies also visited him. He created this huge organization of oppression and extortion, the Church of the Zombie Jesus of Latter-day Dupes. Joseph, it is alleged, translated ancient records recorded on metal plates into English. Again, a book that vanished as soon as the translation was finished. In it, it told the myth of millions of people who lived from the time of the Tower of Babel until 400 years after Christ in the American continent, that they had civil wars where millions of people died, but their instruments of war also vanished without a trace, where no geographical areas mentioned in the book have ever been located. Joseph alleged that the people built ships to get here from the Old World in 3 major migrations. However, gene mapping has negated and invalidated that claim to that hypothesis. Both the dates the people arrived in the American continent and the origin do not coincide with the scientific data. In many aspects, it's more improbable, inconceivable, and preposterous than the Bible collection of myths. The way this sect coerces people to pay 10% of their gross earnings is sophisticated and duplicitous. First, the subtle idea of the lie of immortality is implanted in the brain because nobody wants to die. So they tell you that you will become a zombie and then you can continue living with your intimate relatives, wife, husband, and children, if you maintain a myriad of restrictions on your behavior which they claim is, quote, moral. So you could convince the Jesus character to let you live forever in another sphere of existence. But part, and a major part of your, quote, proving worthy and moral, unquote, was paying 10% of your gross earnings to the religion. Moreover, that it was immoral not to pay them. That this was equivalent or tantamount to stealing from the invisible cosmic being. They understand that millions would pay almost anything for the delusion and illusion of being permitted to be with their loved ones again. Thus, the lie of immortality is one of the most powerful but diabolical tools used to indoctrinate and control the people, usurp power and influence, and bully into one of the most obscene transfers of wealth.
One final point before finishing this is this hoax or delusion of prayer. There are no documented cases of any prayer that has affected the requested outcome from anyone at any time. I asked my father how much a crane could lift. He said depends on the angle, etc. Then I questioned him how much the crane could lift with 100 people with their hands around the crane clasped in prayer. He replied that it would still be the same. I continued discussing this with my father briefly, and he related me to the story that when my oldest younger sister was being born, she was breech. The doctor was concerned. My father went into another room and gave a quick prayer. Miraculously, coincidentally of course, my sister started to turn. I realize he thinks that this is a result of prayer, but nature was taking its time for my sister to turn, and it was pure coincidence that he was praying just when it was time for her to turn to be born. Furthermore, he claims that, quote, the Holy Spirit, unquote, has inspired him to invent many things. He is a very talented man and genius, so it was just his expertise and experience that was the source of his invention. My poor delusional father, even though he did not express the answer verbally,
He communicated volumes loud and clear.
he does not have any evidence of the existence of any God, nor any afterlife, nor any other religious concept, and only believes because of blind, quote, faith, unquote. It is too much for him to face the reality of life and the fact that he will never ever see his loved ones again alive. And facing his own mortality is just too much for him. So he clings to the religion like a drowning rat. Let's analyze a little prayer. Does whispering some words over the food change the chemical composition of the food? It is scientific fact that our choices of food and manner of preparation influences the effects it has on our bodies. Whether or not someone uttered a few words over the food makes no difference. Also, how is it that supposedly a supreme being is more concerned over where you lost your car keys than the 20 to 25,000 children who will have their life experience terminated prematurely every single day? See if you can give me an answer to my questions. How can the Bible lore contradict itself and command a horrendous act of mass murder? How could a, quote, God, unquote, not care about humanity? Epicurus asked it best. If a God is willing to prevent evil but not able, he is not omnipotent. If he is able but not willing, then he is malevolent. However, if he's neither willing nor able, why do you worship it? Show me any evidence to the contrary. Therefore, for lack of evidence, gods are imaginary myths and religion is delusion.